Hi guys, welcome back to this season's journey through heart freedom. I hope that God has been drawing things out of your heart and you've been learning and growing through this process as we've taken us through forgiveness in the last few weeks. And now today, in this session, we're going to address the issue of lies and vows that may have been planted in our heart that are keeping us from growing and breaking into that place of freedom and strength and joy that God has designed for us. One of the things that we understand about the lies that are in our hearts, there are things that we actually believe down where we live. We may know truth intellectually in our head. We may know scripture that addresses that truth in our head. But what we truly believe is where we reside at the heart level. Just as Proverbs chapter 6 says, that as he thinks in his heart, so is he. As what we truly believe in our heart, that's who we really are. That's the faith that we have. And part of the struggle in the Christian walk is we may know things that are true in our mind, but somewhere in our heart we've believed a lie for most of our lives that contradicts that truth. And their intention, they're wrestling with one another for who is going to win out. Who do I give my faith and my trust to? Very often what happens is as we're growing, especially when we're very young, the enemy plants seeds of lies into our lives. He puts things into our heart that cause us to have a belief system that is at odds with the things that God says about who he is, about who we are, about the world in general, about the relationships that we're in. One of the things that I always point back to was when I was very, very young, early in my journey here on this earth, I had a lie in my heart of self-hatred, that I was unlovable, that I was a mistake, that I was an accident, that I shouldn't be here. Those were lies that the enemy had planted in my heart that I believed at a deep heart level. And growing up and being in ministry and knowing that I'm saved and when I die I'm going to heaven, I know all these things. I believe these things. But somewhere in my heart, I had these lies that were operating, that were sabotaging all of my efforts in ministry, in my workplace, in my family, in my marriage. So part of the process of heart freedom, when we go through pursuing forgiveness, what happens is these lies begin to pop up along the way. We begin to realize, wait a minute, I believe things that are absolutely not true about God. For a lot of years, I believed that God would not protect or be there for his servants because I watched my father, who was a missionary, go through cancer, go through plane crash. Everybody almost died. They didn't, but they almost did. It was an unsafe situation. It was terrifying. So I had this lie in my heart that maybe God's not completely good, or if he is completely good, maybe his version of good might be really painful for me. So I had this accusation in my heart towards God because of the lie that the enemy had put there. So in your life and in your journey, you will find as you walk through this process, there are lies that you believe. Some of us, we don't even know we believe them until we're brought to a decision point, until we're brought to a place where the truth comes into conflict with that lie, and we kind of have to make a decision of which way am I going to go? What am I going to believe? So how did those lies get into our heart? You know, some lies are given to us, they're just family lies. They're just generational. You know, when we are born into the family, we get dad's eyes. I got dad's hairline. We get, mom or dad's complexion. Oh, and here's these lies that we operate on, whether you're going to struggle with anxiety, fear, and depression, because we don't know how to break free of those things. So here kid, you get the family name and you get the family lies, or that you're not good enough, or that you're unlovable, or some people struggle with a lie, they're just not smart enough. You know, there are truly, really smart people who are laboring under the lie that they're dumb, or that they're not smart enough, or they can't do it because a teacher, a parent, someone influential in their life when they were young told them, well, you're just too stupid to figure this out. And they took that lie on, and that's how they operated. That was their heart core belief. When they're able to break free of that lie, they find they really have a capability that was beyond anything that they knew that they could do. It's kind of like when they train the elephant for the circus. They tie a chain around the baby elephant's leg and they tie it to a post or a tree that it can't pull away from. So that elephant grows up its whole life knowing that when that chain is linked around my leg, I can't get away. So then they'll put in the ground this tiny stake that the chain is looped on, that a grown elephant could just walk away from easily. But the lie in the elephant's heart is that I can't get away from this. I'm stuck here. I'm a prisoner. That's the same thing that the enemy tries to do in our lives with the lies that he tries to plant, the lies that he tries to build in our situation. One of the things that I was never taught growing up was what the enemy, when he sends an accusation or a lie into our life, I was taught, take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. That's what Paul teaches us in 1 Corinthians. So I would have a thought that didn't seem right, and I would try to go after the thought like, I don't think that's really true. But at the same time I was given the thought, I was given an emotion that reinforced the thought that was given to me. And when I felt the emotion, I kind of accepted it, like, oh wow, it feels really true, it must be true. So where I was going to judge the thought and try to take it captive, the emotion I didn't know what to do with. It's like a 1-2 punch that the enemy uses against us to reinforce the lie they're trying to build around our lives. So if you've been taught to question the thoughts, judge your thoughts, but you've never been taught, judge your emotions. God, why am I feeling this way? Why does this situation make me feel these emotions? What is that tied to? I would encourage you to begin to search out, God, why do I feel anxiety in this situation? Why do I feel fear here? Why does this make me angry? Start to judge and discern between what's going on in your life, because most likely those places where we feel things that are not the Spirit of God, love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, gentleness, kindness, self-control, when we're not feeling the presence of God, it's generally tied to a lie or an accusation that the enemy has brought to us, a lie that we believe in our heart. And then we have to make a decision and a choice that we're going to break agreement with the lie and come into agreement with the truth. So as we begin to judge the situations of our life that we walk through, the things that we think, the things that we feel, especially as we're walking through the forgiveness process, some people feel like, I can't share my heart because if I share my heart, I'll be rejected. Like I'm not worth, it's not safe for me to come out. That's a lie, because God knows you intimately from the inside out. And he says that he desires to have you in an intimate communion relationship. He desires for you to know and to be known. We were made for community. So certain things like that, those are lies that the enemy has tried to wrap us in. Secondly, in regard to vows, vows are, we're not talking about like I'm planning on getting married and I'm going to make vows to my spouse so that we're coming into the covenant of marriage. What we're talking about when we say vows, we're talking about those decisions that are made in a moment of pain. In an intense moment of pain, we decide, I will never let anybody hurt me like that again. Or I will never do to my kids what my parents just did to me. Those vows put us on dangerous ground, because what happens when we make a vow out of pain or out of brokenness, we open the door for the enemy to come in and to leverage that vow against us to keep us in bondage. If we look at James chapter 5, verse 12, the Apostle James says, above all, brothers and sisters, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or any other oath, but let your yes be yes or your no be no, so that you may not fall into judgment. He says, if you go beyond yes or no, if you have to swear, if you have to vow, if you have to get really hardcore to make sure that this thing does or doesn't ever happen again, he's saying you're on dangerous territory, you could fall into judgment. Well, where did James get that from? Well, he got it from Jesus. Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, he says, again, you've heard it said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. In other words, keep your vow to God. And Jesus says, but I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, or your no be no. And then he says this, listen, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Did you catch that? Jesus is saying that if I go beyond just saying, yes, I will, or no, I won't. If we go beyond that into swearing and making vows, he says that comes from the evil one. Why from the evil one? Because the evil one wants to create a snare and a trap for us to be stuck in. What we found very often is when someone has wounded us and we make a vow in our heart, I will never treat people like that. What happens is we actually enter into the very thing that we're trying to avoid. We end up doing the very thing that we hate, because that vow in our heart, that vow that we've made in that place of pain, links us to that moment. We're attached to it. Rather than being free from it, we're kind of bound to it. And it ends up displaying in our lives in ways we never wanted or intended. But when we can renounce those vows, when those vows pop up and we realize, hey, you know what? I think I made a vow in that moment and I don't want to be bound to that anymore. We can pray in our heart, Father, in Jesus' name, I renounce the vow I made that, whatever it was. I won't do that to my kids, or I won't treat people that way, or I'll never become an alcoholic. I renounce the vow and I submit myself to you, God. Would you shepherd my heart into a place of peace and into a place of strength? See, when we make a commitment to the Lord, that's not like making a vow that we're going to be in control and we're going to make sure these things don't happen. Usually vows are to protect ourselves, to keep painful things from happening. But we end up doing the very thing that we hate. Like the child of an alcoholic or an addict that says, I will never, and then they end up following down that same road. It's because of the brokenness that they've tied themselves to. So we need to renounce the vows in order to be free of them. Proverbs chapter 6 says that we're snared by the words of our mouths. And what we understand through the vows is that we can be ensnared by the commitments of our heart as well. It's a snare, it's a trap. Really quick testimony, about 10 years ago, I died of a heart attack when I was 39 years old. And my heart stopped on the table, and the doctors and the anesthesiologists and everybody was like, no way you should be alive, we thought you were gone. And God miraculously preserved my life. And as I began to heal and as I began to grow, this is right around the time we were coming through Heart Freedom, God took me back to a moment a couple years after my heart attack when I was 14 years old, and I was going into the fridge to get a soda. And as I'm reaching for the soda, my mom caught me and said, it's 10:30 in the morning, you can't have a soda before lunch. And she was sitting there drinking coffee. So when I looked at her, I felt, well, that's kind of hypocritical. I kind of judged her because she's drinking coffee, but I can't have soda. You know, what's the difference? And I made a vow. I said, when I have my own money, I will drink soda as much as I want, whenever I want. And that played out through my life. Listen, this is how my life went. And I used to joke about it. I would have Pepsi for breakfast. I would go to work and have a 2-liter of Pepsi that I would drink throughout the workday. Every day I would finish a 2-liter of Pepsi. I would go home and I'd have more with dinner, or when we were watching a movie, or when we were relaxing. One time my wife even asked me, do you drink water? And I said, yeah, there's water in Pepsi. If I didn't have to drink water, I wouldn't. I was in love with Pepsi. And I used to joke about it. Like I used to make jokes about, this is part of my identity. I love Pepsi. It's kind of what fuels my life, the caffeine and sugar. When God took me back to that vow, we had just been doing research about my heart condition, the buildup of plaque in my arteries. And we found that sugar is one of the greatest contributors to the cholesterol buildup, that plaque that builds up in your arteries. And God connected those dots for me in that moment, and He was telling me, Tim, your vow at 14 years old, that foolish offhand, in the spur of the moment vow, almost cost you your life because you gave yourself over to the power of this thing. Paul in Romans 6 says, don't you know that what you present yourself as a servant to obey, that thing becomes your master? I didn't know that vow had made me a slave to soda, that it was a source of strength and comfort and encouragement to me. And it almost ended up killing me because of that vow I'd made. Now that might seem like kind of a silly example, but it played out powerfully in my life. Let me encourage you today. What are some vows you may have made? If you're willing to be vulnerable and transparent, that you can share with the group and have a discussion about what vows or what are lies that you believed. Who told you when you were growing up about yourself, what your capabilities were? What are things you believed about yourself that later you found out maybe those aren't true? If you're not willing to be that vulnerable inside the group, that's okay. I would still encourage you to get alone with God and ask Him to show you, God, what are the vows? What are the lies that I believe? Because I don't want to be under these things. I want to be free. And for those of you willing to share and willing to be transparent, let me encourage you to pray for one another, encourage one another, and bring the truth against the lie, and bring freedom against the vow, so that you can walk in victory in the joy that God has for you. God bless you. I pray you have a great discussion. I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week.